get things kicked off here. But really excited to be here today for this month's edition of Water Data Forum. Water Data Forum is a collaborative webinar series put on by the Cleveland Water Alliance, the Water Environment Federation, and the Midwest Big Data Hub, for the purpose of sharing and discussing topics in the field of water data, demystifying those topics for a broad audience. I'm really excited about this month's discussion on water and education. We'll be focusing in on STEM, issues of youth empowerment, and how that ties in to workforce development. And it's my great pleasure as Max Herzog, a representative of Cleveland Water Alliance, to introduce today's facilitator for the panel, Julianne Jones. Julianne is with WEF, the Water Environment Federation, and specifically works on their Water Leadership Institute program. So is really well positioned to facilitate today's session. So with that, I'll hand it over to Julianne. One quick point. Please, throughout the conversation, feel free to insert your questions in the Q&A tab. It's a little confusing. There's two different tabs, one for chat and one for Q&A. Feel free to drop any technical issues you have, like if you can't hear or having trouble, someone's having trouble connecting, something like that in the chat, and feel free to direct those towards me. But any questions for the panelists, please share in the Q&A. If you do write your question in the chat, we may get to it, but there tend to be a lot of questions in these, so if you want to make sure yours gets answered, please share it in the Q&A. So with that aside, it's my great pleasure to turn things over to Julianne to kick off today's panel. Julianne?
All right, so welcome everyone. As mentioned, Julianne Jones from the Water Environment Federation. So I do run our Water Leadership Institute, and we work on getting people in the water industry learning more about leadership and some of those soft skills and things like that. But I don't want to talk too long as we've got a lot of panelists here, so I thought maybe we would just go straight to the questions. That sounds okay to you, and I'll be monitoring the Q&A as well to help make sure those get answered as well. So the first question we have here is, what does water mean to you?
Water is something that we all very familiar with. So we take it a bit as granted, especially in the US, but we don't realize how much insecurities there can be around water, whether it is total access, whether it is too much, whether it is the quality. And because we have this notion that we know about it, that is, we experience it since a very young age, we do not necessarily understand it, and we do not necessarily quantify it, measure it. So we do not understand how to document it and process that information. So for me, in water education, the way I experience it, whether it is at the high school level or university level, is that there's a lot of bias that we need to fight again and really get into the critical thinking around water notions.
Good afternoon. Just adding my 2 cents onto your question, kind of very basic, I guess, from here at DCWater. We've been, I think, what it means in regards to education and educating not only your customer base, but your future customer base, reaching out to the community, and especially schools, be they middle schools, high schools, whatnot, teaching them what you do, right? What we do is so in the background, no one really thinks about it or understands. They turn on the tap or they flush the toilet, and it just does stuff. They don't know where it goes. They don't know what happens. We try and be very proactive with our community and bringing them, engaging in programs about the services we perform, bringing them on tours here to the Blue Plains wastewater plant, right? Things like that, where it really, I think it changes the perception that they have. And we're also always discussing in these things, in these programs, the opportunities that lay for them in the future, be it engineers, obviously water, wastewater engineers, those type of engineers and STEM people, but also trades, mechanics, electricians, operators. These are all important jobs, and always emphasizing the opportunities and the feeling that you get for returning to your things to your community. So I think that's important, always keeping a very big picture and not just focusing on, say, the engineers, right? That's the easy one.
And I'll add on to that. I'll give a little context about who I am and my perspective, as it'll be different from Nick's, who's at DCWater, thinking more about, interfacing with the public. I'm a professor of statistical science at Baylor University and have been working with collaborators in water and wastewater treatment in both natural and engineered environments for the last 10 years. And, what I've seen is that really, even from a more maybe say technical perspective, is that water data is special. It's different than what you may typically see in a data science course, right? So there are data science courses that are proliferated across the country, online programs. You can get a data science certificate in 6 weeks in some places, but a lot of the kind of data that you see in the water sector is very different than what you would encounter in one of these sort of blanket data science programs. They don't take into account differences like you're getting measurements over time, the order in which measurements are taken from upstream to downstream, thinking about batch processes, hydraulic retention time, what kinds of information do your sensors give you versus not give you? How do sensor faults play into the data that you get? And so there's a lot of things that with respect to water data that I think are not typically addressed in a standard statistical data science, machine learning, computer science academic program. And as Nick was saying, there's just tons of opportunity. There's tons of water data out there and opportunities for students to really encounter a real problem in data science through the use of working with water data. And so that's one of the things that in my group we try to facilitate is, hey, let's get students early on in their academic journey interested in a data science career by encountering some of these really kind of complex questions with respect to water data. But the water data is easy to get, right? There's lots of it out there. And so there's lots of opportunity for even students early on in their academic career to look at it, to analyze it, and to offer some insight into that data back to utilities or consulting firms. So that's a large part of what we do.
And Drew, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I'll step in here. Sorry, I'm late. Drew Ferguson, I'm the CEO of Argonaut, and we partner with the Cleveland Metropolitan School District to operate the Davis Aerospace and Maritime High School. So quite simply, water to us is adventure, it's exploration, and it's opportunity, as you said. And the opportunities that we present are in two frontiers that our students don't readily have access to, and that's the waters and the heavens. We put students on the water first as a step in accomplishing something or reaching out to something that most of them haven't done. Cleveland sits on the south shore of Lake Erie, connected to the largest source of fresh water on the planet and the Great Lakes, and 80% of them at age 15 have never touched it. So quite simply, at the most rudimentary approach, it's purely about exposure, changing expectations, getting over fears. I believe Nicholas mentioned that is, you've got to get past fears and you've got to gain an understanding. And it appears, it not only gets us out on the water to participate in opportunities such as water research, recreational activities, So water is a basic element. It's one of the basic elements of our high school education that we present here in Cleveland.
Wonderful, great things to note. I will say at our stormwater conference this year, we had some students that are affiliated with the Poseidon Education in California come out and speak. And they are implementing stormwater things into like middle and high schools where they'll go out and actually check the parking lots and like clean storm drains and trying to get that education so that people actually know this industry exists from a young age and like feed them in. So agreed. People need to know that there's options out there. Before I move on to the next question, I realized I didn't allow you all to like fully introduce yourself. So I want to give you a second to make sure. I know a couple of you did that, but make sure everybody knows who you are. So Nicholas, do you want to do a quick intro?
Sure. I'm Nick Passarelli. I am Director of Process and Operations Engineering here at the DCWater's Blue Plains Wastewater Treatment Plant in Washington, D.C. So that's me.
Great. And Laureline?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Laureline. I'm an associate research scientist at the Columbia Water Center, and I work on an NSF grant where we're trying to use data platforms inside high schools to convince underrepresented population to switch to STEM, because there's a tremendous bias in who works in that department, and we really need to make sure that it translates all the way through the data that is collected, right? So as a researcher, I get biased data from the lack of representation.
Excellent. I know Mandy, Drew, you gave little intros, but I'll still throw it to you to do that as well. So Mandy.
Yeah, hi, I'm a professor in the statistics department at Baylor University. I'm also the PI of an NSF award that we've titled Modernizing Water and Wastewater Treatment through Data Science Education and Research. And that's been the thrust of a lot of our education activities over the last 3 or 4 years.
And I'm Drew Ferguson, the founder, CEO of a 12-year-old organization, nonprofit in Cleveland called Argonaut. We created and opened a urban high school in the city of Cleveland. It is a public high school, and we, assure its success. It's grades 9 through 12. It's a unique public-private partnership that is built around is very much a STEM school. It is very much a vocational school. It's a very much a college prep school. But we differentiate ourselves from those other programs just by saying we are a themed school. Our students engage in activities on the water and in the air, from flying airplanes to drones to submersibles, driving boats, and collecting water samples. So we pretty much just establish that it's anything water, anything air, and the students find their own way, and we build programs around what's working, what's popular, and what's needed.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And sorry for skipping that up front, but I wanted to make sure we got back to it. So the next question I wanted to ask is, how does your work leverage water data for impact?
We have a lot of small projects here at DCWater with regards to data and analytics, i.e. so we have large control systems, databases, historians full of data on the operation of, say, this plant, Blue Plains. We get like 60,000 hardwired IO points that come in. So we get data from these every second, and they get put into this database. So we have tons and tons of data. We have a number of people within our groups that look for situations, i.e. We've started operating a tunnel system for our long-term control plan, actually controlling wet weather flows and avoiding overflows to the river. So we've teamed with Virginia Tech, and we're doing a program where we are analyzing that data, looking for correlations to rainfall intensity, plant flows, all sorts of the data that we have to try and predict how best to operate the plant and the pumping systems, such that we can get to the minimum amount of overflows and the maximum capture we can. Other things are a little smaller, like we were having an issue where we were breaking some of our final effluent filters. So we just threw, it's basically taking all the data, throwing it into a blender, getting a data analyst to kind of massage it and see if we can come up with correlations as to predicting which filters might be at risk of being broken in the near future, and we can mitigate that. So we're doing a lot of small projects around our utility to try and understand, let's just say, predict the future so that we can better react, in a nutshell.
And I'll hop in and say, I think that any work that I do is incredibly interdisciplinary. So the water data that I get is from my partner collaborators. It may come from industry, consulting companies, and part of the problem is in the process is trying to understand the process that the data was generated from. And, regardless of what type of system it is, the kinds of questions that we're trying to answer are generally, how can we improve the operation of the system, right? Is that either by, as Nick mentioned, anticipating changes in the system that require a change in set points so you can, control blowers better, control pumps better, reduce maintenance, improve water quality or quantity. So that's one thing, is sort of how can you make forecasts in order to improve the control of the system. And so there are various ways to do that. And so we work on developing those methods. We also look at how we can identify faults in the system. That could be could be a faulty sensor, it could be a faulty pump. And then, the data begins to, show some signs that there's some fault or some break in the system. It could be a change in the influent, right? We look for, methods where we can monitor all of the data for changes in possibly just the average levels, or if there's a change in the variability in the system. And it's not enough to just say, yes, we've identified a problem. We also need to give operators information about which particular sensor measurements were the ones that were primarily associated with that fault in order to diagnose the problem, right? Because it's not enough to know there's a problem. You need to know where do I need to go or to look to begin to fix it. So we think a lot about the methods that we might design in terms of controlling models or controlling systems better, or identifying faults in the system or changes in influent in such a way that, these are things that operators might reasonably use and reasonably trust. And so we try to build methods that are intuitive from an operator standpoint, that are accessible. And so they don't, just say, okay, I'm just ignoring this fancy method over here that no one understands. It's too opaque. So that's part of that interdisciplinary aspect of thinking about building monitoring systems or control systems that are accessible to those who will actually be using them. So I think there can be lots of impacts, on, we're looking for improvement and impacts in terms of the environment, the system itself, to reduce maintenance, make it safer, last longer, reduce energy, operate at lower cost. And also just to be able to provide the water that is needed, the quantity that's needed at the time that it's needed, in the quality that it's needed at.
Okay, thank you. Oh, Drew, you got it? Perfect.
Yeah, go ahead, jump in. So water data for a Davis Aerospace and Maritime High School student is hands-on experiential learning. While studying marine and environmental sciences, they're able to utilize real-world, real-time, relevant data. Further, they're involved in the actual collection of the data, or supporting other partner organizations as we launch buoys, go out and assist water collections, operating vessels, in order to get those researchers and equipment out on the water to fixing the vessels that are going out and doing all that work. So overall, they are not only recipients of the data and connect to it, but they are able to contribute to that data collection. This offers our kids endless opportunities to get involved and make those meaningful connections to their individual lives and bring about change through the community through them.
In our case, we work directly with the instructors because the goal is to enhance the experience of the students by using federal or state data platforms that are up to date because they're managed by the government and that give data, the best data, that the state-of-the-art data that you can have access to make sense of the news of what's happening currently when we look at drought, when we look at water quality. And this is where we rely on these data platforms because it makes it, first, we don't necessarily have access to someone like Drew to help all of the teachers, but also it makes it quite interesting to switch scales, to augment lab experiences with showing what's happening at the state level, what's happening at the city level or the national level. Where it gets really tricky is that oftentimes the narrative is quite depressing. It's very hard to be confronted with the lack of information, or the information can be extremely scary itself. The news for water in the US are very difficult when we talk about infrastructure, whether it is up to date, whether it is monitored, whether the quality of the water is sufficient, is not poisoning. It gets very hard to have this conversation. This is why I'm not stepping into the classroom, but the instructors are really working towards the social emotional learning that go around the question of water and trying to find solutions and be hopeful for a better future. But the diagnostic of what's going on right now and the gaps in information is not a happy story. So we're hoping that we can convince them to step up, and hopefully ourselves, we can also improve the current situation.
May I add on to that, Laureline? That was great. I mean, I love hearing about things that are more macro scale water data. I feel like I agree that there's a lack of these large scale data sets certainly available for students to work with. And even the types of data that I work with that might be more plant or facility level, oftentimes people will tell us, we have so much data. And then when we really drill down and begin to look at it, they have a lot of measurements, but they might not all be measured at the same point in time. So they might not all be concurrent. And so, and there's often, just lots of missing observations here. Oh, well, this sensor went down. We forgot that sensor went down for a period of time. And so when you really begin to look at it all together, well, you have a lot of data, but it's simply not sufficient to answer the question that you want. And so sometimes it's, we wind up giving recommendations for, here's what we would measure if we could, in order to answer your question. And I think a lot of those, water is, the problem is it's everywhere, right? And there's so many different scales of it that it is a very challenging problem to think about being able to measure it and monitor in the environment and in facilities.
Great, those are all really good points. Thank you. So I have another question here that I want to ask you all, but I also want to mention to those participating today, if you have any questions, throw them in the Q&A section and we'll get to those here shortly. But as we're talking about water education, what do you think the future looks like from your perspective? Thinking about maybe exciting trends or intersections with other areas for transformation. Are there any particular interesting goals, strategies, or long-term initiatives that you all are thinking about?
Maybe I can start because I think I was quite depressing in my previous answer. So what was the idea behind our proposal for that grant? We just started basically, and was that when I use a data platform, the formidable Utah Water Rights platform that exists to assess whether your well is going to have impact on create depletion for the surrounding farmers. I used that at the master level class, whereby I was giving lectures that might have been a bit boring at first, but when we used the platform, I realized how much knowledge was not going across. So it was a great way to verify that knowledge was working by using data platforms, these official data platforms. It was also very useful to see students sorting out between what they care and what they don't care about. And also enlightening what Mandy was mentioning before, is that the transdisciplinary dimension. If you look at wells data around Pennsylvania and New York State, what you see is where fracking is allowed and where it isn't. So you see political decisions having a very physical impact in terms of where you have data points or not. And so this really, like water and data platforms and data in general, just to reinforce the point that Mandy was getting across before, really helps getting at the transdisciplinary notions, disciplines, knowledge, skills, and attitudes that we need to address these questions and find solutions. And it cannot be limited to one individual. So it really helps building a community of actors that are needed to make sure that every voice are heard, that we can take that problems in a more holistic way. And there's no easy answer to that.
I also didn't want to be negative that there's no water data out there. That's not what I'm saying. But it's often, at least in our experience up to date, has been, personal network connections, trying to get data from a facility. But I think that some of that is beginning to change. So Water Dams is a data repository where water data sets can be put. That's part of a Department of Energy project. We are beginning to archive some of our data that we've received throughout the program publicly through the Harvard data repository. So I think that more and more of these public data repositories, I think will provide some of these data sets that people would like to use for educational purposes. And so it's not so bleak as all that. I think that that might be one of the trends in the next 10 years that really changes. And I think that, more people need to take some coursework, some fundamental coursework in some data-driven disciplines, and more departments, I'll say this from an academic perspective, more and more departments are offering courses with the understanding that people are going to go and apply these methods to real life problems. And so they try to make the course accessible for people with those goals. Now, I think that providing the tools that people in water and wastewater treatment industries actually need to apply these, there's still some gap there. And that's something that we in our group are working on to provide some training. So for example, next summer, we're going to be hosting a week-long workshop for students in upper level and graduate students in water and wastewater treatment, environmental engineers who want to learn how to apply data science and want to learn how to do some programming, say in R in our studio, who want to apply data science to their particular problems in water and wastewater treatment. So we've been hosting undergraduate summer research programs, and we're in the middle right now of doing an industry short course, so for professionals in water and wastewater treatment, and so now we're kind of transitioning a lot of these efforts to the upper level undergraduate and graduate level, because these are the students who are going to be entering the water and wastewater treatment field in the next few years. And they're the ones that are really going to be transforming the way that data is thought about, when they're working for utilities, consulting firms, working in education, et cetera. So we're trying to give them the skills that they need to go out and work with the data that they'll encounter every day.
Great. Nicholas or George, do you have anything you wanted to add?
Sure. So I think at least from my point of view, from the utility, what I see as important in the education field is to keep in mind two things that are very important to us. One thing that I found here, and I've heard a number of our panelists talk about, is the need to build a very varied team with different technical backgrounds. So we've worked hard in our process group to basically bring in people of different, very divergent talents that may or may not necessarily be directly tied to traditional water backgrounds, i.e. computer scientists that could work for any computer company, not necessarily a water agency, but chemists, biologists, and in typical environmental engineers. You bring all these groups together to work on these projects, and in essence, the sum is so much greater. What you get out of it is so much greater than the sum of their individual talents. They really are able to build off each other. But I also want to make sure that we stress that the nature of the industry is changing, be it water treatment or wastewater treatment or any resources, is it's become much more advanced and technological. The processes are becoming more complex. The equipment is more complex. Certainly the instrumentation and the controls, all these things combine, needing a greater skill set in all your workforce, from the operators, the mechanics, all along. So one of the things we did is we've been creating and rolling out an apprenticeship program, working with local high schools and trying to bring in promising young students and start to train them so that we can get ourselves good, strongly based operations staff or maintenance staff that can help build into this team that we are trying to create, that helps us act independently and do these projects and work efficiently for our ratepayers.
Great, those are really good points. Drew, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I'd say, in our environment, again, we're looking at, the big words and a big push moving forward with most organizations is diversity, equity, and inclusion. As it applies here, moving into the future, we should be engaging, all of our various communities and individuals, making sure they have a voice and making sure that they're involved in setting the direction, setting priorities. Each concern, each community has its concerns. I think that our challenge is bringing concerns about the environment to the forefront and a higher priority, which is very challenging because the issues we're facing, a lot of our urban communities have a much more immediate impact and challenge to the types of kids that and young people that we're trying to get into the environmental and maritime world. So the challenge moving forward is we have to address the immediate concerns and issues that are going on in our urban communities and our super rural communities, so that we can elevate the environmental concerns. I think, I've been spending a lot of time this morning watching a funeral, which isn't really me, but the environment just keeps coming up. I mean, we have to start tracking data. We have to start understanding data and really educating our next generation to appreciate that this is an immediate threat. And while the immediate threats to them are often violence and food shortages, we have to figure out a way to address those while also bringing the issues that we have in the environment to the forefront and elevating it so that we can tackle this as an entire community.
Yeah, I think those are all really good points. I did want to mention, like at WEF, we have started an inflow program. So you're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion. And so the inflow program it stands for Introducing Future Leaders to Opportunities in Water. And so what we've been doing is have two different paths. There's a STEM path where we're partnering with undergraduate and graduate degree programs, looking for students that are historically like underrepresented in the water industry, racially, ethnically, gender as well, honestly. So just trying to give people the opportunity to get involved. And they get to learn about the water industry. They get to come to our annual conference, WEFTech, and meet professionals and often find jobs in the water industry because they're meeting so many different folks. And then we also have a career tech portion, which is focusing more on the operator side of things. So there we are working with community-based organizations and exposing scholars in the job readiness programs to a variety of rewarding career opportunities. So they also get to go to WEFTech. And we also work with people that are in that area so that they have time to actually join us and be there. So we're working on trying to get more people in the industry. I know some different states have also tried to start programs like this as well. I know PNCWA, I believe the Illinois WEA as well has started that. But thinking about things like that, do you have, I know you've mentioned we need to get more people in, we need to talk to scholars. Do you have ideas about how to make this happen? Or not that, you know, you're not going to solve all the world's problems, but just thought it might be a good discussion for that.
I'll jump in again. Now, obviously, what we're doing is just starting at the most fundamental level. Getting the kids on the water. We started with learning to swim. You can't get a kid near the water to collect a sample if they're deathly afraid, and oftentimes that's generational. So when we have a freshman come in, ninth grader walking into their first week of school, we start with the pool. We start with a 5-foot deep pool that gradually gets deeper, and we overcome those fears. We teach them how to rescue themselves, how to rescue their friends, and we have fun. It's no longer a challenge. It's something that's fun. That's something that's accessible and part of their lives. And then we move into the Lake Erie, and you move from a pool where you can see your feet to where you can't see your feet anymore when you're in 3 feet of water. And not only being excited and realizing that they can go into a different type of water source, and it goes from ankle deep to 50, 60, 70 feet, and if they have the skills, they're okay. But then really discussing why the water looks the way it does. And so we do it very organically. And I think that you got to meet kids where they're at. You're trying to get more women involved. You're trying to get more underrepresented individuals involved. The first thing you do is look around and see, okay, why is this difficult for them? You walk onto a yacht club, or you meet up at your first session at a yacht club, and the kids can see it clearly they're not there. Or you go out on a research vessel, or in our case, an airplane, and it's all white men. So trying to break that down, trying to get individuals who want to get involved with the kids and might look like them. Not that those are the most qualified, but you have to put an extra effort to try to find folks that can help to make the transition easier. So it's again, we take baby steps. We meet the kids where they're at, and then we open it up to opportunity. We do have good relationship with Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District, working now with Limno Tech, Case Western Reserve University, Cleveland State. So starting to really reach out and show the kids that just the variety of pathways. You can have a job next summer. You can have a job upon graduation. You can continue on to college and get a job in this field. You can go up to 10, 15, 20 years of schooling to achieve what goals you want, but just making it accessible and showing that it's fun and it's exciting.
I feel like I want to come experience Drew's program now and get out and do some sampling, because I feel like I'm behind a computer all the time. So yeah, on my end of the spectrum, we're not out collecting water data, but we are on the receiving end of water data. And I think some of the things that we try to do to get students excited is to give them real data, so that's one of the challenges I would say in the data science community is the kinds of problems and the kinds of data sets that students are given to work on are already so easy in a sense, and they're not real. And so, we bring students in their freshman and sophomore years, and we throw them in the deep end and start teaching them, not just how to program, because that's kind of dry and boring. We want to teach them how to think about data, how to ask questions of the data, and then how to get those answers out of the data. And to get the answers out of the data, they have to learn how to program. So in the course of trying to answer questions with data, they learn how to program in R. So it's a means to an end, right? It's a tool to use. And they recognize early on in their career, oh, wow, this is what real data analysis looks like. This is what a career in data science might look like. It's not just, do I have, 30 observations and I can do a t-test? That's what most people in statistics think about. And so when they see that early on in their career, they get really inspired to continue on. And it's working in groups. So even in the classroom, we have students working in groups and in teams. In our summer program, we have them working in groups with a graduate student who mentors them, sometimes both a statistics graduate student and an environmental engineering student. They meet with the stakeholders that provided the data. And that makes it really real, that somebody spent the money to collect this data, the time, the effort. They understand it. They know what all the variables mean. And they're just sitting there, wishing the best for you to find something from their data that's interesting. And they're motivated to do something cool with it. And I think making it a more of a community aspect and not just and I say community, I use that word loosely because what I mean is it's not just students sort of working individually on their own by themselves. I mean, I think typically the statistics, computer science fields have been somewhat solitary. You went into those fields because you don't have to work with people. But we're getting a lot of students who, they want to talk about things. They don't want to be making decisions by themselves and maybe go down a wrong path. You can, brainstorm ideas about how to approach the data with their peers, and that makes it more exciting for them because they're doing it together and it's not an individual pursuit.
So another thing maybe to mention is the current events that are happening. I think in terms of motivations and showing the need to have a capable workforce is very clear. It has been part of the NSF big ideas for over 10 years now, and the news only has reinforced this over the summer. There's no doubt in terms of Lower East Side, just in New York City, what's happening in Jackson, Mississippi. These events make it very clear that there's a need for competent individuals working in these disciplines. Where we need to make sure is that at the university level, if we look at the statistics of who's coming into the programs and who's dropping out, I would say like lecturers at the university level are often the source of the issue. And Center for Teaching and Learning have been working against that for years, and the documents are immense in proof and strategies that we can adopt so that our practice of educating at the higher level are not pushing anyone to the side. And I feel like if we were all to adopt the strategies that Mandy has been describing, we would be in a much better place. So it's make sure to have this constant attention.
Did she freeze for everyone else?
Yes.
Well, hopefully we get her back in just a second. But there was a follow-up question, Mandy, to what you were saying. So I'll interject that real fast. But do you believe that current students have the appropriate level of data literacy?
They could always have more. And it's certainly something that I think students, regardless of what their area of expertise ultimately will be in, need more of. So I know a lot of students, when they finish our intro to data science class, they say, everyone needs to know this. I'm like, yes, everyone needs to know this. We're hoping that, everyone will know it, whether it's applied to water or not. But, I'm seeing just with my own kids and their curriculum at school, I'm not a K through 12 expert in terms of, what students are being exposed to, but they're already learning about median, mode, variability. They're beginning to think about those concepts, I think, earlier and earlier in K through 12. But I'll say that oftentimes, even when they get to college, there's some variability in terms of who's been exposed to those ideas and who hasn't. And so, yeah, we always try to do what we can to shore up those deficiencies and But yes, it would be, I think that basically any major on campus can benefit from some data literacy, and studies have shown that if you have a good background in data analysis, regardless of your field, that you can really excel in your field.
Wonderful. Nick, did you have anything you wanted to add to this?
Sure. Just quickly, because I think what my answer is very similar to what Drew was talking about, where you're engaging early with students, say in high school or whatnot, where you're trying to excite them about this whole water field and the whole breadth of the different jobs that might be available to them, or career paths that might be available to them throughout, from college to trades to whatnot. I mean, there's a whole plethora of careers that they may not know about, and really it's incumbent upon a lot of, especially utilities, I think, to get out into their community and explain what they do and excite the students about the field, because I think can be very rewarding, because not only do you get yourself a good career path, but you're doing something good for your community. And how often do you get to say that in your job, right? Not every job can do that, but I think that's an important thing, and I think I applaud that for any efforts in that area.
I want to jump in and follow up as well. Mandy said our program sounds so fun. I said, well, I didn't really speak to the other stuff because I'm clearly more of an operational guy. I found that our most attended and sought after programming is based around coding. Our students have grown up in a digital world, and they like adventure and problem solving. And so how that is translated into getting more involved in this and finding data and analyzing it, and even developing programming to understand and make it relevant. We're still developing that. I know that I looked at some of the Great Lakes data resources. There's a lot of information out there, and the kids go out and grab what they can find easily, but identifying 2 or 3 sources that you can stick with, that way the kids can compare results versus kids using all these different data sets. Our kids are very, the basics of reading, writing, and arithmetic, I think, have fallen back a little bit, but the ability to utilize computers and technologies to understand things it's ingrained in our kids, regardless of where they come from. So I talk about swimming and going on the water and flying airplanes, but our most popular programs are the fabrication lab, coding, and system and design. So I think that with this generation that's grown up with iPads and iPhones and everything at the palm of their hand, I think there's definitely a more natural hunger for information and converting it to understandable information.
If I may add something on that part, I hope there's where I see a lack of data literacy is often also at the highest level of researchers. There have been many documentation, and probably not at the system level that much, because we're talking about real data. The way all of you work actually with data is probably at, I don't know what's happening, but global models or national models or state models, there's a lot of mispractice. And I would say that there's one example that is very typical, is that you had this group of researchers that developed a model, global model, and showed that the groundwater was going up in southern India, when in fact the levels kept going down. And it was purely from an issue with data literacy, which is just questioning on where your wells were being located. And it turns out that all of the wells that were actually used were dropped out of their data sets because they screened against that wells that actually had measurements. And the wells that had measurements were in area where you had still water. When it dries out, you no longer have water levels. And so they removed these points, and they calibrated their models against these data sets. So this is just one example, but there's actually many of them. When we talk about drinking water quality, making any kind of model beyond linear regression, and even a linear regression would be a bit pushing it. Sometimes we have terrible statistical scores on them. So what I often see is a lot of will and desire to use fancy neural networks techniques when we don't have the data set for that. They tend to not work quite well with time series, which is what we're interested in to deal with seasonality in water sciences. So there's a lot of gaps in the community that are currently teaching in terms of data literacy. So this is where I see us collectively, we'd be good that we make some improvement in terms of what it means and defining the notion of water data literacy. I would be excited to see that written out and have a manifesto about it.
Great. Thank you all so much. So I think we were just hitting the top of the hour, so we want to be respectful of time, but I do want to thank everyone for joining us today and all the panelists for the great discussion. Max, I don't know if you have anything you wanted to add to wrap us up.
Just thanks again, everyone, for joining and for sticking with us through a couple of technical difficulties. We will be reconvening the Water Data Forum next in November to have a discussion about water equity and justice and the relationship between those issues and water data. But really want to thank our panelists here today for having such a robust discussion about the education side of things and how STEM and water and data can really be empowering the next generation to take on these issues. And thanks so much to Julianne for facilitating really great discussion.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.